wanted to talk with you. We had a little conversation yesterday about life in football, why you coach, what your vision is for Myers Park and mission and goals, and just like to hear a little bit about all that.
Sure. My life has kind of been about high school football. My father was a high school football coach from the time I was born, from as long as I can remember. I spent my falls around football, particularly high school football. I didn't play football as much as a kid because my dad was a coach. My mom worked full time and was raising me and my brothers, and my dad wasn't around much because he was a coach, so there really wasn't time, for us to play a whole lot.
Right.
But I was around the game, my whole life. Actually, broke down film for my dad. I think I was probably like 12, when I started, he taught me how to break film down, and I sat in on some of his coaches' meetings before I was even in high school. So that was kind of something I always grew up around. I played a little bit before I got to high school, but obviously I played in high school. I had a good career as a player, nothing special. I was all conference, but when you're 5'7", and that time I was probably about 160 pounds. You don't have a future, playing the game. So I got into coaching myself right after college. My first coaching job was at a school called North Carroll High School in Maryland, kind of the northern part of Maryland. I got a job working at the school as a teacher assistant, and then got into coaching. And my first meeting with the head coach, he told me that this was going to be his second year at the school. They'd gone 0-10 the year before, and that 0-10 increased the school's losing streak to 21. So they had a 21-game losing streak, and we didn't win a game, I think, until like week 8. So I think we were 29-game losing streak before we won a game. I did stay there for 4 years and became a head coach fairly young. I was 28 years old. I was back before this new age of hiring all these young guys that they have now, but at the time I was the youngest head coach in Maryland, and I was fortunate a job had come open that I thought was, attractive, and a guy that had coached with and worked with my father was the principal. So I kind of had a little bit of an in there. So I became the head coach at Bowie High School. And I think that kind of started what has kind of been the trend in my head coaching career of kind of going to places that needed rebuilding. When I got there, Bowie had I think it was 9 straight losing seasons when I got there, and we added a 10th and 11th in my first 2 years. I like to tell people my first year as a head coach, I went 1-9, and I wasn't close to being 2-8. We were not good, but we did gradually get better year in and year out. In my 4th year, we won the Maryland 4A state championship, which was, that was a pretty big deal in that town, and I was the youngest head coach at the time to ever win a state championship in Maryland. But at the time I was living in my hometown, and it was kind of a pretty good commute to Bowie, and a job opened up in my hometown. And to give my own kids a better chance to be involved in what I was doing, I took that job at Lackey High School, and again, kind of a rebuilding job. My second year at Lackey, we played for the state championship my second year at Lackey, and that year was the first time they'd won a playoff game in 19 years. We played for 2 state championships and a regional championship when I was there. And my own children were kind of getting older, and I kind of thought maybe I'd start looking maybe places where high school football was a little bit more valued in the South. And we moved to Georgia. And spent 2 years just outside of Augusta. Probably not 2 years that were the best for me professionally, but what it did was it got me to Charlotte. had I not left Maryland and gone to Georgia, I never would have ended up in Charlotte, and that was kind of how the Lord moved there to get me from one place to another. And I went to Marvin Ridge, and again, not necessarily a rebuilding situation, an actual building. You know, it was a place that was brand new, and had really a lot of good memories and a lot of good times there. Probably the biggest thing was both of my sons played for me there. Both of my sons played for me. My oldest was a record-setting quarterback, and so I got to be around my kids and kind of be a part of their lives, which again, some that I probably missed, growing up, with them growing up and coaching, I missed a lot. So this was a chance for me to kind of be around them, and after winning 42 games, I think, in 5 years, and I think being pretty successful, the new principal at Marvin Ridge decided that he wanted to get his own guy, and took a year off, and then was fortunate to end up here at Myers Park, which again, I think could certainly be considered a rebuilding situation when I got here. I didn't realize it. Our last senior class that graduated, one of them pointed out to me that before they got to Myers Park, like 7 of the last 10 years had been losing seasons before that class came in that just graduated. So it was a tough gig to start with, and but I think we're in a good situation now, and I've kind of told myself if I ever were to leave Myers Park, it would probably be for a school that's coming off a state championship or really good, because I don't think I can do the rebuilding thing again. I don't know that I have that in me, because it's work. It's a lot of work, and it takes a lot to build a program from scratch, and so I'm not sure that I could do that anymore. But you talk about my life in football, and I've been around it my whole life, and I followed what my father did, and now my oldest son is an assistant at UNC Charlotte. Coached the last couple years at Coastal Carolina, so he's going to probably against my wife's advice and wishes. My son's kind of gotten into coaching, so I guess it's just something that we do as a family. So obviously, when you look at guys that have had influence on me, certainly the number one will be my father, from growing up around the game and watching him as a coach, and then really having the blessing of the first 8 years that I was a head coach, my father was one of my assistant coaches. So that was a real blessing, and real great opportunity for my family and I to kind of have that experience. And then when I was an assistant coach, at North Carroll, like I said. The guy that was the head coach, Bill Rumbaugh, like I said, we were 0-8. He was in the midst of a 29-game losing streak, and we eventually got to the point where I think the third year I was there, we went 7-3, and we got better and better. But Bill was the same guy the year we were 1-9 as he was when we were 7-3, and just a guy that taught me a lot about having principles and having morals and having a way of doing things and having a standard. And that's kind of what we talk a lot around here is the standard. And Bill taught me about having a standard, and no matter what your circumstances were, the standard doesn't change. And I really learned that from Bill, and he's still to this day one of my closest friends. And and I had the good fortune when I was in college. My father ended up taking a job, left education, and went to work at the Joe Gibbs Youth Home out in Northern Virginia, was the director of the Joe Gibbs Youth Home. And I got to know that family well, and got to know Coach, and with him living here and us being here, I've gotten to spend some time, building a really good relationship with him over the last few years. And there are days we'll just go to lunch, and I just listen to him, and he's had a tremendous influence on me as well. So those are kind of, some of the guys that have influenced me, and just kind of where, my career has kind of ended up, are accountability. We're going to be accountable to the guy next to us. We're going to be accountable to our school. Our work ethic. We're going to, one of our funny things around here is that we have outlawed the word grind in our program. That's a big, buzzword now. We're going to grind. Well, we don't use the word grind in our program, and the reason is, to us, grind means work.
Right.
And we don't want our kids to ever feel like when they come here that this is work. Right. We want them to feel like they have the opportunity to come here and that this should be fun. They should enjoy this. Right. We tell them in the summer when they show up here at 8 o'clock in the morning in the summer, we want you to come here with the attitude that you get to do this. You don't have to do this. Right. You get to do this. And we always want it to be fun. We always want our kids to enjoy it. So, with our work ethic, though, we do kind of tell our kids we want them to enjoy themselves. Our community service is a big deal here. We have a community that gives to us tremendously, resource-wise, financially, but the support we get, there's no better place out here, I think, in Charlotte than what we have on a Friday night. So we do a lot to give back to that community. We want our kids to be committed. We want our kids to be committed because, we try to teach them that when they're committed and when they're passionate about playing football, that commitment and passion is a habit. We tell our guys all the time that, when you're here, we want you to be passionate and committed about being here because that translates to life. You better be committed and passionate to your right. to your academics. Otherwise, you're not going to do well in school. Employers want people that are committed and passionate about their jobs. Right. When they go to be husbands, your wives want husbands that are committed and passionate, about being a good husband. So, we tell our guys, if you're going to spend the amount of time that you're going to spend, here in football, you better be committed to it and passionate about it. Right. Otherwise, what's the point? And then on the field, we have a standard of how we're going to conduct ourselves. We want to conduct ourselves with class and integrity on the field, in the classroom, and in our community. And all of that is part of the standard that we have here. And, so when we just kind of say, hey, is that meeting our standard? Is that part of our standard? And the other big part of our standard is that we don't measure ourselves on somebody else's standard. In other words, if I'm not, we were at with a bunch of teams at something a couple weeks ago, and I told our guys, hey, let's remember that we don't compare ourselves to everybody else that's here. We compare ourselves to what our standard is. And that's what we're judged on. We're not judged on how we are compared to other teams. We're going to judge ourselves on how we uphold our own standard. Right. And so, that's obviously a big part of what we do here. And again, it's something that, goes way, way back to, when I first got into coaching over 20 years ago, that has, kind of carried me to this day.
Can I give you something about grind? Grind is bad. So if you have gears that grind, that's bad. A well-oiled, well-aligned machine doesn't grind.
I'm going to use that.
It works.
Use that.
It works. Right. It goes through whatever it's supposed to go through, right. Whatever it is. Been in your case, you talk about comparing yourself to yourselves, not to others. Thus, you're always attempting to elevate yourself up and make yourself better.
Correct.
And thus, a well-oiled, well-aligned machine will just work right through. It will not grind. Grind is bad.
Yeah.
It is a popular.
All right, we got to sweat. We got to work. We got to get right. through. To me, the word grind means get through it.
Right.
And we tell our kids, we never want to get through this. I never want you to come out here and come to practice, come to a workout, whatever, and think, all right, I got to get through this. No, embrace it. Let's, right. Our Tuesday practices, okay? Our Tuesday practices during the season are our longest, most intense practices. And, when we take the field at 2:45, that's our message to the guys. Don't come out here and try to just get through this practice.
Right.
Come out here and embrace this time. Try to be better individually so we can be better as a group. Let's not try to get through it. And to me, that's what I think of when I think about grinding is, all right, let's get through it. And we don't want to send that attitude to our kids. Let's just get through it.
Yeah, I've not liked that word for work.
Right.
Because it does, in my world of machinery, grind is a bad thing.
Yeah.
You don't grind through anything. You stop it and you fix it. So what you do when you're grinding is you stop and you fix. So you find what's wrong. You align, you replace, you oil, and then you get it back to moving.
Right.
So machines don't grind. If
Yeah.
they do, it's a bad
If they do, it's a problem.
Right. One of the things I wanted to ask you, as you talked about your coming up and rebuilding, one of the marks that I see about you, and that is one thing that someone could say about you, is he takes programs and he rebuilds them. I've mentioned this to you before. I'm going to mention it now and see if you've got any comments about it. And that is, what I see is that you end up placing a lot of good coaches around you, a lot of good people. And I'm going to just leave it at that and let you carry what that does.
A big part of my coaching philosophy is I want to give our players and our kids every resource possible to be successful, obviously as football players, academically, but as people too. And part of giving them, those resources is giving them other people to do that, and giving them the best people around them to help them be better football players, and better people. And so if you can put good people, then those kids benefit from it. Right. So I think part of putting good people around me is it benefits the kids, but it helps me. When you have quality assistant coaches, it helps you as a head coach, and I think the coaches that are unwilling to, maybe put a strong group of assistant coaches around them, I think it speaks a little bit to some insecurities. They're insecure that somebody else might get credit for something, or they might not, be considered, whatever. To me, having good people around you helps you to achieve, your goals. And for us, obviously, we want to be successful on the field, but that's not, my number one goal as a coach. My number one goal as a coach is that every kid that comes through our program has a great experience, and they've achieved some lifelong memories, and they've become better people because of it. That's my number one goal. And, obviously we want to win games too.
Right.
But when you have more people to help you, it helps the kids. We've got about 150 kids in our program. For me to give every kid that great experience, and for me to have young men that leave our program as better people, there's no way I can, I can do that,
right.
By myself. I have to have people that are willing to pour into kids, and it's a group effort. It's coaches. We have a great team chaplain here. So it's a group of people that come together that try to give these kids a great experience. I use the example of, one of our kids had an article written about him in the paper a couple weeks ago because he had missed his sophomore and junior year with a very significant knee injury, and had a great year as a senior. And when they asked him about, what helped him, he talked about Joe Evans and the relationship he had with Joe Evans, his position coach. Well, some other coaches as a head coach, may look at that and go, well, what about me?
Right.
Well, no. I looked at that as I empowered Joe, to pour into that kid's life, and I empowered Joe to do that, and that kid's life is different because of that. It's not about me always doing it. It's about putting people in place to do that job, to empower them. And then from a football standpoint, I try to put guys in positions as coaches and then let them coach. if you talk to Andy Marketing, our defensive coordinator, he'll tell you the story of I got asked to speak at a clinic over the winter, and they wanted me to talk about our defensive stuff, and I was like, I can't really do that because I don't know what we do defensively, So I try to give people jobs and let them do their jobs and stay out of the way. And as long as they're doing that, a certain way, then I'm not gonna interfere. And so I think that's a very, very important part of being a successful coach is hiring good people and letting them do their jobs.
Okay.
I think the mark of whether or not you've done a good job of putting quality people around yourself is if you weren't there, would things continue? Would things roll on? And, I look at, just go back to my situation last year. If, something that happened to me last year, I've got Joe Evans, I've got Mark Harmon, I've got Andy Mark, I've got, Hal Brown, who's been a head coach. I've got former head coaches on my staff. I've got guys who are more than capable of leading. And I think that is one way that you measure, whether or not you've put, quality people around you. And I think this year we've continued to do that. Obviously we lose Joe, but, Mark's still here. We've added, Josh McCown, who's coming off playing 17 years in the NFL. We just, I'm thinking of guys that we've, our defensive staff is somewhat intact, but we just hired Curtis Fuller, who was the, Panthers DB coach 2 years ago. So again, we're hiring, quality people that, again, give our kids the best chance to be successful.
Right. I really didn't want to make this about what is next year going to be like, but I'd probably be remiss not to ask at least, how do you feel about next year? So you did lose a good coach, a good motivator, I think is probably his things, but from my view, I don't see that upsetting the apple cart.
To answer your question, we're all obviously very excited about this year. I think the sting of kind of where it ended last year. Those guys remember. We were up 13-0, with the ball, in that semifinal game, and just kind of got away from us a little bit there. And these guys remember that, and they remember how things ended last year, and we don't shy away from the fact that we do have some talented guys.
Right.
And we do. I think any ranking service, whatever it is you look at, we've probably got the number 1 and number 2 receivers in the state. I think we clearly have the number 1 quarterback in the state. We've got a 4-year starter. We've got 3 of our 4 starters in the secondary back. We've got, our second leading tackler back, 2 guys that started on the D-line for us. We can't stand here and poor mouth things and say that we're, because that would look stupid. We obviously do have some talent. How far we go is going to depend on how healthy we are, and that's any team, any year.
Sure.
It's going to depend on our health, and it's going to depend on, the guys around that talent is how well they play. I think we know how well, we know Drake's going to be good. We know Moose is going to be good. We know Porter. We know those guys are going to be good. But to win a championship, to win a state championship, it's the other guys that have to do well. So, how far we go is going to be dependent on, what those guys turn out to be.
So a question would be, I don't know where we would pick the number, but if you in your head ranked your players, and you going down the list of numbers, when we get down around 18 to 21, how do you look from, say, 18 to 30?
I think, I kind of look at, 1 through 22, 23, 24, 25, that we're pretty good. Right now, it's developing what I'd say probably 25 through 35.
Right.
I'd say that's what we're trying to focus on this summer, and what we'll focus on a lot in August is being able to develop that next group of kids. And then, we lost 4 starters on the O-line. Right. So we have pieces there. It's not like, the cupboard's bare. We do have pieces. We have some guys that we can, feel like are going to be good for us. But it's like a puzzle. That offensive line, there's pieces, but we've got to put the puzzle together with those pieces on the offensive line. And I would say putting that offensive line together and developing some depth is probably our biggest things here in the summer.
Okay. We're about to wrap up, but I wanted to ask a couple of things along the lines of, and you may want to have this on tape and may not, I don't know, but we're losing a lot of coaches in Charlotte and North Carolina, but particularly in Charlotte.
I've already been quoted pretty heavily, so I ain't breaking ground here if I comment on this.
We know that part of this is salary. Aaron Brand goes down and nearly doubles his salary. That's certainly one of the things, but not all the jobs in South Carolina are double your salary jobs. But still, coaches leave, and we're even seeing coaches end coaching. What are the struggles for a coach? What are the struggles that you see for coaches, especially? Are they harder in Charlotte than they are elsewhere?
I don't know that it's harder in Charlotte to coach than anywhere else, but I think it seems like every year, what doesn't seem like it is, every year there's more demands.
Right.
Whether it's extra paperwork that has to be done, whether it's extra classes you have to take, whether it's dealing with I didn't deal with keeping track of kids' social media 5 years ago. Now I deal with that.
Right.
Certainly, managing parents' expectations. The job gets harder every year, but I don't know that is so much a reason why people are either leaving or going other places. I can't speak for other guys that have done it, but I know in Aaron's case, again, he got a significant salary raise, and he went to an area where there's an obvious emphasis on football. My son, for Charlotte, his recruiting area is a lot of South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting when he would, go recruit some of those schools, he'd call me and he would tell me about, some of their, facilities.
Right.
And some of the schools he was in. Our weight room, I think, is as good as any probably in the state, certainly here in Charlotte. And the schools my son was recruiting, he goes, this is standard operating procedure. He goes, this isn't, an anomaly. And, so I think coaches want to work in better facilities, places that do value football. But part of that valuing football is, what they put into it, financially to the coach and to the program. My big thing here is that I think, and I've said this before here in CMS, there are some coaches that just kind of feel like being a head football coach, that's as high as your career can go. We can't be athletic directors.
Right.
We can't be, assistant principals, so the top of your career in CMS is teacher coach, and that's it. Right. And I think maybe some people don't want their career to be capped at that. And right now, that's not an option. And I know for me, I want to be an athletic director and a head football coach. And if I want to do that, I'm going to have to leave.
So that
now,
rolls.
What keeps me here right now is I've got a great principal. I've got a great community behind me. I've got great parents here. And that's what keeps me here.
Right.
But there may come a day where that's not enough. There may come a day when, I want to advance my career, or I just want to stop living paycheck to paycheck.
Sure. So let me ask you this question. One of the things, there's many things I'd like to see happen with CMS. But one of the things I believe that should happen is that schools should take on their own athletic directorship. That like the high position paying jobs in South Carolina, those guys aren't just football coaches, they're athletic directors, right? So, but they're full-time athletic director, not a teacher.
Right.
They're a full-time athletic
Right.
director. So they take care of the other sports, which in my opinion is very important in the whole integral part of school. Do you think, based on your experience in North Carolina, or more importantly here in CMS, that we would see that ever happen?
I mean, I know it happens in other areas of North Carolina.
Right.
It doesn't happen here. And like I said, I'd certainly like that opportunity. I'd like that opportunity, and you know, and I think a lot of other guys would too. And I also think the one thing it does when you're trying to hire really quality, high quality athletic directors, by taking coaches out of that equation, you've limited your pool of candidates.
Exactly.
You know, you've limited your pool of candidates because you've told an entire group of people who are obviously maybe qualified because they've been in athletics, where you're telling them you can't do, you're
Right.
not, you can't even apply. You know, so you limit your pool of candidates very quickly because not just football coaches,
Right.
any coach,
Any coach.
you know, is not, you know, welcome to apply. And I think in our case, we've been very fortunate since I've been here at Myers Park that we've, you know, we've had great athletic directors, and, you know, we haven't had much turnover, but other places there's constant turnover year after year after year because coaches are unwilling to give up coaching. You know, most coaches still, they'd love to be athletic directors, but they don't want to give up coaching.
Right.
You know, and that was the case. You know, we just hired a new athletic director here, and, you know, I could have, you know, obviously, you know, pursued that job
Right.
significantly, but I wasn't willing to not be the head
Give
football
up the
coach.
I spoke a couple of years ago to a gentleman over at Olympic. He had coached with Tom Knotts. He was in a lower level of admin. And I asked him when Fowler was coming over, was he going to consider coaching? And he told me, he said, I can't. I'm in admin.
Right.
I'm considered in administration, which I think is wrong. I believe if a principal may not have the time, but if a principal wanted to coach and could make it work, I think anybody should be able to hold the positions.
It doesn't affect your day-to-day job.
Exactly. Then don't limit. So,
To me, a successful athletic and down to that football program at any school is for the most part, I think a lot of that's set by the principal and by the administration.
Right.
And do they understand the value of football and athletics in general? And you know, after what I dealt with at Marvin Ridge and you know, the last principal that I dealt with there, before I took this job, I mean, I sat down and, you know, I had breakfast, you know, with Mark Bosco.
Right.
And he'd offered me the job, and before I took it, I had to know, you know, that what his feelings about football and athletics in general were. And, you know, I was convinced that he totally understood that there's nothing that brings the school and the community together like football and athletics overall, but to a greater extent football. And he understood that. And we've seen it the last, you know, couple of years here when we've been, you know, pretty good, the level of support and the level of unity that's behind, you know, coming from our community, from our alumni. You know, there's nothing like football and athletics in general that rallies a school. Academics are obviously your number one priority, but they don't necessarily rally people. There's so many layers that go into building a successful high school program, and it starts with your school administration, which also may, you know, even go up to the school system administration.
Right.
You know, your school system administration, you know, has to have some value in athletics.
Right.
There has to be some value, you know, from the school administration, from the district administration.
Yes.
But your school administration, to me, you know, is the most important. They've got to be willing to understand the value of what a good football program does to your school. and I've been fortunate every place I've been, for the most part, I've had that. The year I won the state championship, my principal at Bowie that year, Bowie High School, her husband was a high school athletic director for years. He did his master's thesis. His master's thesis was what a good high school football program can do to change the culture of a school.
Would he share that?
I don't even know if he's alive.
Man, that's awesome.
But, so I was fortunate that I worked for a woman whose husband, had taught her that.
Right.
So, she gave me the world. And she also understood that if we won, how much better it would make our school. And to that end, the year we won the state championship, the first semester, our school attendance rate had gone up like 7% from the previous semester.
Right.
And she'll tell you that, she told me to that day, she's like, well, that was our football team. Kids wanted to be in school. Kids wanted to be a part of what was going on. They took pride in that. And then when I got to Lackey High School in Southern Maryland, and we went to a couple of state championships, my principal there, Mrs. Petty, she was just overwhelmed at how our success rallied the town and rallied the school. And because of that, from that point on, she did everything she could to make sure our program was successful, because she saw what it did to our school and what it did to our community. And I've had that, when I was at Marvin Ridge, Bill Cook, who's now the superintendent of schools in Rock Hill, Bill was my principal my first 4 years, and he was the first person that I heard use the phrase that, football was the front door of the school.
Right.
That it was a lot of times the first things that your people in your community saw, was your football team. And he treated it as such, and he, treated me as such. And, and obviously coming here with Mr. Bosco, I mean, he was a principal at Independence at the end of their,
Right.
their run. So he understands, the value of what a good football team can do to a school. And, it was funny, yesterday he comes down to workouts and, walks in the weight room and is just pumping the kids up, and, and he's excited.
That's awesome.
He's never forget a couple of years ago, he almost got us a penalty,
On the sideline.
on the sidelines, getting so excited, he almost ran on the field, but he's passionate about it, and he's excited about it. And that's how most of our administrators are here at our school. They're very supportive of what we do, not just football, but all of our sports. But they understand the value of what football can do.
Right.
To me, football is the ultimate rallying point.
Right.
It rallies your students, rallies your community. And again, I feel like I'm a very good teacher in the classroom. Education is obviously the number one thing we're here for, and it's the highest value. But there's not exactly the rallying point. In other words, I tell people all the time, I've had several games out here the last 2 or 3 years where there's been 3, 4, 5, 6,000. A couple of the games we played at Memorial Stadium, there were probably 8,000 or 9,000 people that come watch my football team. I've never had somebody come watch my health class.
Right.
Nobody ever comes watch me teach health. But several thousand people often come watch me coach football.
Right.
So
your health class doesn't generate income.
No, it does not.
You do through those ticket sales.
Right.
Exactly. Which helps the school, the other students in the other athletic
Sure.
programs. There's high value in both morale and financially.
And I think that goes all the way up to, goes up from high school into college. One of my favorite stories that when I was in Maryland that Ralph Region told was when people were complaining about Ralph being, might have been the highest paid state employee in the state of Maryland at one time, and people said that, well, he shouldn't get paid more than the school president. And Ralph's response was, that's fine. He goes, October 7th, we have a bye week. At 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, have President, whatever his name is, come give a speech in our stadium. And let me know how many people show up.
Yeah, how many tickets do you
He
sell?
goes, the following week, we're going to play North Carolina in that same stadium at the same time. Let me know how many people show up for that.